Hello and welcome to Superconnectivity. I am your humble host, Charlie, the Professor Esser. And with me, as always, is the man with the plan, the man with the knowledge, the man who fills me in on what I do not know, and there's a lot of that.
Phil, fill me in, Parrish.
Hey, Phil. Glad to have you here. Glad to have you anywhere, Phil.
Thank you.
No, Phil, honestly, he's going to tell you, Phil. When I started Superconnectivity 243 years ago with Rob Southgate, who was my first co-host, I could have lost interest had it not been for a plucky young, insanely young millennial, Generation Y, as we used to call them in my day, who stepped up and said, "Hey, I'd love to do a podcast with Charlie Esser. That sounds like fun." And I roped you into this. And now, Phil, in many ways, you have become my mentor as well. Honestly, I don't know much. I only know what I know. And I speak about it a lot. But there are men like Rob Southgate and Phil Parrish who have, and David White, I'll give him the props too, who have guided me on this podcasting wonder over the years. And man, I'm glad I searched. I'm glad I searched Marvel podcasts in the YMCA one day to listen when I work out, because that's how I found Enough Said. That's how I found Rob Southgate, and that's how I found Phil and Dave, and of course my sister from another mister, Lilith Hellfire.
There you have it, the secret origin of Charlie Esser.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's much of a secret. It's just that it's a lot of issues to read. And Lilith, if you ever listen to Super, we're going to have to do this test. We'll see if Lilith ever actually hears this. Lilith, you made me mad to buy a comic book that wasn't an Archie today, because I really wanted to buy this week's Josie and the Pussycats. And I was like, oh, no, I got too many books. And, man, curse you, DC, and your substandard books. I'll be honest with you.
Sounds like a SmackDown on episode 9 of Capes and Lunatics.
Yeah, well, honestly, that Jughead, and for what it's worth, Jughead was written by Mark Waid, who is a great writer. I'm now like, man, I want to explore this Archie's universe more. And, I don't know if I want to go into that main book. Mm-hmm. Hey, I went into DC with Superman, and I think that was a great jumping on point for me. But usually I want to be on those edges. I want to be on that obscure. I want to be on the ephemera of a comic book grouping. I just think that's like where you want to be, because you're going to find your niche, depending on where you're from and how you pronounce that word. And then from that niche, you can move into where you like the rest of it. As I always say, when I got into Marvel, it was with Conan. Conan the Barbarian was really one of the first real Marvels that I got obsessive about.
Well, that's what I've said. I've said it before. Those like fringe properties are like gateway drugs for comics, because that's how I got into Marvel, was the Transformers comics. Exactly,
and I was just. We'll get into that in a minute, but yeah, I was listening to not Enough Said, the Wait podcast with Graham McMillan and Phil Lester. It's a great podcast. I do listen to it. It's ungodly long. And as far as I know, it's the only podcast those two do. So I don't know why they're doing all that talking on that one podcast. Like, make 6 different podcasts. They actually have 2. They do have the Baxter Building. And there's stuff that I'm like, here's the thing about podcasters, and this is what I think differentiates like good podcasters from podcasters who are good but aren't good people. It's when you go back into old issues and you judge them with your grown-up brain, thinking that these were written for grown-ups. Written in 1983, wasn't written for a 40-year-old man, and granted, yeah, it's not what we would do right today, but it's something that was written with the understandings of someone who grew up in the 60s with their progressive ideals, which were, probably not the progressive ideals of 2018. And, and with the writing caliber that had to speak to, not for nothing, my son Tristan, because that was what those were written for, And granted, Tristan is a great, brilliant child who enjoys monsters, and so he was really happy to read this week's issue of Gwenumverse. Gwenum. Yes. Okay. He heard his name, so he wants to come on camera. He's a knight. He went to medieval times today. Okay. You want to take Gwenum and finish the book, or did you finish it already? Okay, you go finish it. I don't know. I had to take your bookmark art so I could read it. Though I will say that Edge of the Venomverse #2 with Gwenpool was a really good book. If for nothing else, just because the Venom symbiote, because it's corresponded to Gwenpool, now had its understanding of comic book universes, so it makes the point to her, don't worry, this isn't a canon story. And it's like wait, you have that alternate dimension perception. He says, well, only because I'm bonded to you, because what you have I have, and I can tell from what you have, from what this isn't, for what I mean, in a way, it's kind of a dig on Gwenpool. It's like, look, they're not going to bond you, Gwenpool, to the Venom symbiote. That's just not marketable. But I think Charlie's going to buy it, but who else?
But I think the original point you're making is like, you could tell like a shift, like when comics shifted. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like around the first Civil War, like in 2005, comics seemed to like age up. What you want to say? That. You could say that, some of it's definitely not for children, or not for young children.
Yeah. Here's what I will say, and I think this is the problem for me on finding that point, is I think the Gen Xers are the generation that made the transition, because what it was is the Gen Xers, we kids from the 80s, we kids from the 70s and 80s, we were the kids who had the first group of 60s kids who started writing comics. So that was the first time that there were comics written by adults who had been kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the kids who had read the comics became adults, they started to infuse adultism with an understanding that our marketplace is still kids. And what happened is as those kids grew up, who were reading the adult comics for kids, got into writing comic books, they kept on moving the bar up and up and up. So that now I think comics are in many ways written for people that are teens and above.
So basically, as the fans grew up and became the creators, the characters kind of grew up too.
Well, yeah, because you wind up with a much more complex story.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting enough, Alan Moore, of all people, with his Tom Strong books and several others, really wanted to go back to a more classic comic book thing, and he did that with his 1966 series. He did like a 66 that he did with Marvel, where he was essentially Watchmening all the Marvel characters, creating pastiches of everyone. But he had too many conflicts with editorial. Editorial's always a problem for guys that imagine themselves true artists. I say artiste as opposed to artist because, no one who is an artist actually calls himself an artiste. No. I mean to Alan Moore all the time, but that's okay. We're friends. We can do that. Not really. Not at all. But yeah, I mean that is what's interesting about comics. And for me, when I listen to Wait, which I do love, and right now they're running through they have this podcast called The Baxter Building, which is on their main feed. And I'm plugging the heck out of them. And I'm going to tell you, it's a good feed. If you want to just listen to some really intense comic book conversations, Wait, and Baxter Building are really good. But the problem is, for me, is that when they do approach these things, they do approach them as old men rereading comic books that they read when they were 10 and 11 and saying, oh, his perceptions of the world aren't as evolved as mine today. And it's like, well, dude, your perceptions of the world weren't as evolved as they were when you were 11 either, I'm not going to say what your world was, but I'm going to wager that probably you have grown and matured since you were 11. And the world you knew...
One would hope.
One would hope. One imagines, Well, and this is actually something I always come back to, I love Bugs Bunny. I think most people really enjoy Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Porky Pig and Yosemite Sam and the entire Looney Tunes crew. The fact of the matter is that there was a lot of adult humor that did go over our heads. And we now as adults know that stuff. Know there was a humor that was meant to go over kids' heads. I think too many people think they got it when they were kids. I think too many adults today think, oh yeah, I totally got what the subversity of Bugs Bunny was back when I first saw it and I was 8. It's like, no, you thought it was funny that there was a guy in a dress. Not for nothing. You thought it was funny that there was, in many ways, gay panic jokes in Bugs Bunny, which is all gay panic jokes. Now you can repurpose what was done in that and to say, no, it's actually a really loving story of a trans rabbit and a closeted gay man who is seeking happiness. But at the end of the day, the joke was, hey, look, it's a rabbit in a dress, and the dumb guy don't know it's a rabbit in a dress.
Well, once again, look at the time they were created. Those cartoons were created in too.
Yeah, well, no, but for what it's, and I'm not faulting that, because honestly, that's a funny joke. The idea that, oh, you don't realize that's Bugs Bunny in a dress, that's a funny joke because it's obvious to everyone else. That's the joke of it, is that you make a joke on a dumb guy by making the answer obvious. Like when we want to emphasize that this character is not intelligent, and the best way to do that is to show that he does not see through what is clearly a bad costume. And then of course you get to Tiny Toons and they hang a hat on it, which is that they out and out say villains are always fooled by bad costumes, which is a comic book trope. But of course, Tiny Toons came out when I was a teenager. It felt so uppity with my brain and all full of my knowledge. And of course, it's written by people that were nerdy kids when I was a kid, who, as they grew, said, we're going to hang a hat on everything and we're all going to laugh because we're in on the joke. This was not what I wanted to talk about today, because what I wanted to talk about today, Phil, is Easter eggs. But first, before we get into this, do you want to rant in any way about old people saying we're so much smarter now than we were when we read these the first time?
No, let's keep away from that because I'm almost there. So
yeah, it's like what? I like those books.
Just like back in my days in the '90s, or
Yeah, well,
have you seen? I mean, it seems like the '90s are making a big comeback, especially in comics. I mean, look at the Spider-Man books. You got Scarlet Spider. You got Spider-Man 2099.
Well, of course.
They made the announcement today. They're bringing back, at least for an issue, that Azrael was Batman. I mean, the 90s are rocking strong, I guess. Is that because they're not bringing in younger fans, and they're like, oh, all these people are people who read comics in the 90s?
Well, you know what it is that you get. Well, it's the business conundrum of catering to a more sophisticated audience. Essentially, comic books raise their prices so that a kid can't go out with his allowance money and buy 4 or 5 comics. And that's the thing, is like, you know, a kid right now, I mean, I don't know what kids get today in allowance, but I know that a working class kid isn't getting $20 a week allowance, you know? So
let's say, for argument's sake, they are. How many comics can you get for $20?
You can get 5.
Know.
Yeah, exactly. I know, because that's how much I spend on comics a week. You know.
And when Marvel's pumping out like 90 books a month, it's like, well,
I know. That's what I'm going to tell you. Is like me as an adult grown man with a regular job, and exactly, I put my numbers at $20 a week because I know, and that's because I have rent and everything else. Now, a kid doesn't pay rent, but I'm going to wager most parents aren't spending rent money on their kids' allowance. You know. So you're immediately automatically attracting an older crowd, you know, or you're only attracting children of other nerds. You know, I think what is the importance of cheaper comic books is that you get kids interested who don't have it at home. So like your kids, my kids, our kids are going to know comic books. They're going to know science fiction. They're going to know whatever we find as our interesting genre tropes. But there may be kids that are just as nerdy as you and I are, whose parents don't have a picture of Spider-Man in them. You know? And, you know, they might get it from the TV and the movies, but the attraction is not there. And of course, I think where you're at with comic books now is that they have shrunk their market to older folks, and I think that's their problem. But I always say that's their problem, is that they don't have a regular. They don't have, you know what they need to do. I mean, honestly, if they were smart, they need to create. And how to get these out there? They need to create like. They need, you know what? Here's what I'm going to tell you. They need to do what the Archies have done, which is every grocery store I go into, I find Archie digests for pittances, and it's all just reprints of Archies. You know, but kids who see that, whether they're young boys who see the Betty and Veronica summer special with girls in bikinis, or little kids who see Archie and Jughead making a joke on the cover and want to read it. You know, if we're looking at a resurgence of Archies, I think that may be why. Because I think the Archies have embraced this idea that, no, you have to get kids reading your comic books and then have them age into your books, not have them be unable to comprehend it. When I was a kid, you know, as the comic books matured, so did I. And so when I'm reading, you know, the Evolutionary War, you know, I'm in a place that my mind can, you know, as ham-handed and as weak as their arguments are, I'm in a place where I can understand them and work with them and see there's something deeper than just superheroes punching each other at play here. You know? And I think that's the thing, is that we don't have that natural growth anymore, because now it's adults who read books written by adults who read comics reading comics. We don't have anyone writing for kids anymore.
Well, see, I got reminded of this week because me and my son have been reading comics, and we started reading. We're rereading Untold Tales of Spider-Man. Remember in like the mid '90s when books were what, $1.50 or $1.50, or were they more? Yeah. They had like this line of like 99-cent books, like Untold Tales of Spider-Man. Well, wasn't there a Fantastic Four book? I think there was an Avengers book or something, but they were 99-cent books, and I think they said they might have been geared for kids, but I mean, I read them as like, you know, an older teenager, and they were still entertaining. It's like, That's what Marvel needs. They need in continuity books, maybe for a cheaper price. Hook the kids and.
Yeah, well, that's what everyone needs. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
DC at least has a line of $2.99 books.
Mm-hmm.
Although I do, that's the thing is I do read a DC book and I do feel there's way less content I'm getting for that $2.99. And again, I go to this question, like, if they went to that pulp paper, would I get more pages? And let me give you an example, because this is what you have to think about. If it costs 3 cents a page to do the high gloss page, and 1 cent a page to do the pulp page, it doesn't seem like much difference on an individual book. But when you extrapolate that all out over a big run, suddenly that savings adds up. Even like a 1 to 2 cent difference, or a 3 to 2 cent difference, those pennies add up. And I think what we're at, this is what I've said. This is why I said the thing comic books need to do is either go all digital at a 99-cent rate, or cheaper rate, or like $1.99. Here's what I'll say. I think there's a lot of working class kids who get $10 a week allowance. I can imagine that. And the only problem is they don't have credit cards. But that's a whole other bag of hammers when you get into how to distribute the digital. But you do like $1.99 for a digital copy, or even a digital copy of some old book, or you work it. I think the math can be done. The problem is for these comic book companies, I think that they don't know that they've gotten to a point where they're not quite sure how to write books for kids anymore. That kids can access, feel smart, and then go on from. As I was saying about the Wait What podcast, they were talking today about, what is like one of my central comic book books, because it is literally the first one I ever, not literally the first one I ever won, but like one of the first ones that got me into the superhero universe, which is, tied to this, which is when the Invisible Woman first becomes Malice. And Daredevil comes in and says, "Why are you fighting an amorphous blob?" Because he sees the force field, not Sue Storm, and that's this whole thing. And they're like, and they're on one hand praising it, and then just tearing it down because it's not as good as like a book that was written today. It's like, well, of course it's not as good as a book that he's going to say. I love the Song of Gilgamesh. Honestly, it's a bit predictable. I mean, it's the first book ever written, so it's a lot of the stuff that we think of as tropes today. I mean, they were all fresh when Gilgamesh was written. They're like, hey, let's have the wild man from the woods and the strict king buddy up, and now they've got to fight crime, and that's that was this revolutionary concept at the time when the Song of Gilgamesh is written. But now we look at it and we say it's cliche. But you have to remember that sometimes these cliches were actually first started with these people that are first making the cliche.
I love the Byrne Fantastic Four stuff, and it's like with like Stan Lee before him and like all these writers who created these stories. I mean, they may seem dated these days, but I mean, you needed that foundation. You wouldn't be where you're at now. You wouldn't have a Marvel Cinematic Universe if you didn't have these stories. No,
I mean, not at all. And I think that is emphasized in Homecoming, because what you can say about Homecoming is it is exactly like the 60s Spider-Man, but set in a world with black people. It's a set in a world where we are aware of that that there's more than one color in that a colorist can use more than one color for flesh tone. So because it says flesh tone doesn't mean that's what you use. Although that was an interesting thing I've noticed. I noticed this actually in Occupy Avengers, but I have seen it in a couple other places as well. There are Black Hydra agents.
Well, remember, they're not Nazis.
Well, but this is actually a thing that Marvel has made this point, which I think is actually an important point when you discuss this concept of fascism. it is so easy to fall in a. And let me give you an example. It's what I call anti-Israeli anti-Semitism. The idea of anti-Semitism is a real issue. And very often people who say, I don't agree with the politics of the state of Israel, will say, well, you're just anti-Semitic. And, well, in truth, and this is the crux of the biscuit, in truth, there are a lot of anti-Semites who don't agree with the politics of Israel. There is an argument to be made that you can have disagreements with the policies of Israel and not be an anti-Semite. And it is a very, because it turns out, and racial dynamics, way more complicated than what you might usually find in a comic book. That there are not just heroes and just villains, that everyone is a hero and everyone is a villain in every story that they happen to appear in. Mm-hmm. You know, for what it's worth, there are a lot of people, and I'm sure Donald Trump and Donald Trump Jr. see themselves as heroes. You know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in the real world, who sees them? I'm sure there's a few, but who sees themselves as the bad guy?
Exactly. I mean, which I think is one of the most endearing parts of the Netflix Daredevil series, the first one, when the Kingpin basically says, "Oh wait, I'm the bad guy." It says, "I just realized I'm the evil man who sets upon people," and I embrace that. And just this idea of embracing villainy is such a revolutionary notion that I don't care that there are people that are hurt by what I do. It is for my reasons I do it. And that is why that's revolutionary. Now, I'm going to tell you something. In 20 years, people are going to say, oh, what a trope. The villain recognizes he's a villain. But it's revolutionary when Netflix Daredevil did it. And it really is revolutionary when you think about it.
Well, I mean, yeah.
And granted,
look at popular entertainment now. I mean, TV shows, movies, comic books. I mean, especially the comics these days, you're not getting the villain, the mustache twirling villain who's like, oh, I'm evil for evil's sake. Everyone has, either some tragedy in their backstory or they have, an agenda.
And
no one's bad for evil's sake anymore.
Yes, and to that extent, I remember a bit from Berkeley Breath, in which from an old Bloom County, in which Steve Dallas gets access to a time machine and goes back in time, and the image that you remember is Steve Dallas. I don't know if you ever read Bloom County, but Steve Dallas is a lawyer. And he goes back in time and realizes that there's all these lawsuits that people never brought. And he's sitting in a bunker with Hitler and he says, Hitler, put down that gun and repeat after me. And Hitler says, I'm a victim too. And just, it's like, honestly, it is just the most crazed, offensive thing you could think of. And I will always respect Berkeley Breath for going there. For saying that, victimization culture expanded out says that, yes, Hitler is a victim too. Because he did have a lousy childhood by most accounts and all these things. But at the end of the day, we as intelligent people realize that that's not an excuse and we do have to rise above our situations. But then again, if any of us were raised as Hitler was raised, would we be Hitler? Who knows? Human life is too complex. But anyway, that's not even a point to be made.
But here's my thought. I mean, I can see Hydra, having people of color, as ground troops, because even like a Nazi racist like Strucker or Zemo might be like, okay, you people of color, stand up front. You're our human shield.
Actually, I'm gonna go you a little bit better because there actually is historical there is actual historical precedent for this. Mm-hmm. Where when the Nazis invaded, because one of the Nazi goals is to reclaim the Ottoman Empire. And there is all this, there are documentations about explaining why Turks aren't Arabs. And for what it's worth, this, and to give you an understanding of colonialism, this is an issue that exists to this day throughout all of the Middle East about the difference between Turks and Persians and other persons from the Arabian Peninsula. And these different groupings that each group has said, we're from this group. Because, of course, what happens is that these Europeans come in and they pick who they decide is going to be. Essentially, they confer whiteness upon you. And in that whiteness, you now get to be part of the group. And so you get to have your power over others. And the perniciousness of racism is a real problem because it is it's easy to pick on white people just because we were the most recent people to do it. We were the ones who did it when the cameras were on. It is an inherent human trait, differentiating groups of people from other groups of people. And if you want an example of this, you need look no further than the fact that the Irish were horribly oppressed by their English overlords. Even though at this point in history, who can tell the difference? Which, of course, is the most racist thing you can ever say, is who can tell the difference between that group and that group. Okay. Not what I wanted to talk about tonight. I wanted to talk about Easter eggs. Do you want to put the politics aside for a few minutes and talk about some interesting things from Spider-Man Homecoming and other things that we've seen?
Yes.
Okay, so now that we're actually going to... So we've talked... It's interesting. Honestly, I blame the guys over at Wait. If you do start following them, please write to them and say, hey, I heard about you on this obscure podcast called Superconnectivity. And they were talking up about you. They were talking a lot of trash, but they also said I'm glad you enjoyed the book. It's a good book, isn't it? Tristan just read Edge of the Venom verse 2, featuring Gwenpool, which I thought was a very good book. And he just had to tell me they just finished the book, so he's very happy about that.
What?
So, can you hear me?
Yeah. You think you cut out for a second.
Weird. Okay, yeah, I saw like a mute button come up on my thing. So Tristan just finished Edge of the Venom verse, and he had to tell me. That's fine. Mm-hmm. It's a good book. I kind of want to read the second book and the third book in the Edge of the Venom verse now. It's like, oh, that was interesting. I'm sure the next one won't be as good because it won't feature Gwenpool, but there might be some more interesting story to come along. Anyway, here's what I wanted. So here was the thing. This is what I actually wanted to talk about today, was Easter eggs in film that spawn fascinating fan theories. And my fan theory from Homecoming, based off of a little tiny statement by Happy Hogan at the very end of the film, not at the very end, but near when he's loading up the last load of things, and he says, okay, we have the old Hulk. He says the old Hulkbuster armor, which is interesting because it means that there's now a new Hulkbuster armor. He's not right now, Ben. Oh, fine. Say hi, Ben. That's Ben. He's saying hi. Okay.
Hi, Ben.
Okay. Yes. He says we're loading up the old Hulkbuster armor. Mm-hmm. It says and he tries to say the Nordic word, but he says Thor's belt, which is of course Thor's belt that increases his strength dramatically. And then he says, and the new Captain America prototype shield, or Cap's new prototype shield. And here is the thing. He says Cap's new prototype shield. Now we know Tony had a prototype shield because he had a shield in the first Avengers, or not the first Avengers, the first one second. in the first Iron Man that shows up. And in the second Iron Man, they make a point that it's not the real shield, it's something else.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, this prescription's being told that they're done.
So do you think they do have a new Captain America in the wings?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. If he's making a new shield, there has to be a new Captain America.
And do you think is he trying to create like another vibranium shield, or is it going to be one of those energy deals?
I'm not sure what it is, but whatever it is, it's going to be interesting. And I think because that's the thing. I think about it is if there isn't, because here's the thing: we know Tony is looking for new heroes, and this is what I think is interesting: that the fact that it's associated with Thor's belt of strength. Okay, and that's the thing. They reference Thor's belt of strength. Now we know, is Tony going to have Thor's belt of strength? If Tony knows Thor has a belt that makes him even stronger, given how he treated the Infinity Stone, is he going to just let that sit in his lab and not look at it?
Are we going to get a bunch of fill-in Avengers? Like, are we going to get like a John Walker Captain America? I think Red Norvell wore that belt of power.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking we're going to get that Tony has, because here's a deeper aspect of it. And of course, CBR recently agreed with me after my podcast. How did that happen? I know you're listening, CBR. That Tony is the villain of Spider-Man: Homecoming. That Tony is and really, when you think about it, every aspect, everything that's bad happens because of Tony. Tony screws over Toombs, which makes him turn to supervillainy. Tony, empowers Spidey, and then leaves him to his own devices, which of course leads Spidey into all kinds of bad outcomes in his life. And for what it's worth, it's an interesting comparison to what we were talking about earlier about when you're a kid and you're like comics and when you're an adult and like comics. Tony imagines that when he was Peter's age, and if someone had given him an Iron Man armor, he would have been always perfect with everything he did, even as he knows, even as an adult with his Iron Man armor, he hasn't been perfect. But he's willing to overlook that just to tear down Peter.
Well, like going back to what we said before, can you really blame Tony, or do you blame his upbringing from Howard?
I still want to know who Maria was. I'd let you know. There's this big fan community that wants Maria to be Angie from the Agent Carter series. That if Tony's mom is Angie, that if her real name is like Maria Angela, whatever, then she goes by Angie just because she feels Maria is too ethnic, and Angie is more anglicized. It's Ang is right in it, so it's a little bit more anglicized. And she's an actress, so you got to think about that.
Well, I don't know if we're gonna get anything with his parents, because even like the what's his face who plays his father now, as he's on Preacher.
Yeah, but
he's the star of Preacher.
People do more than one show.
That's true.
That's the thing. It's like we're in a golden age of television, but it's also very incestuous, where everyone is pretty much, you have this working company of actors who go on everybody else's shows, and everyone shows this. This is why freaking characters from Games of Thrones are showing up on Doctor Who. Because they're like, oh, yeah, we need an actor that our nerds are going to recognize. So I'll go to someone from Game of Thrones. So, so basically the guy on Preacher is there because he's Howard Stark on Agent Carter. So it's like, we'll get that. So it's not like Marvel can't bring him back. Say, hey, come back for Carter,
True.
And for what it's worth, it is what it's worth. But the reality is that I think this idea that Tony is trying to recreate Avengers that are going to blow up in his face.
Mm-hmm.
That might be an interesting aspect in Civil War. Or not Civil War, Infinity War. The first one. That basically Tony has had to create his own Avengers. So he's got this, and then he's going to get, some guy with the new shield. Because, of course, this is going to be important. We're going to see this in Black Panther. If Black Panther took back the shield, he said, no, this is Wakanda's shield.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how your father got Wakanda's vibranium, but we're taking it back. Because not your thing,
Well, that's what I'm thinking too. That if the new Captain America might have one of those photonic energy shields, because didn't Coulson pull something like that out on Agents of Shield?
Yeah. Coulson had the photonic shield. Love photonic shields.
So I mean, they could tie that in, be like, that was Stark tinkering around with the photonic shield.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, honestly, obviously, they have photonic shields in this universe.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what Tony's going to create, who knows? It'll be better than just a photonic shield, because it's probably going to be a shield that has some kind of. It's probably going to be a shield that has some. You know what it's going to be? It's going to be a shield that's going to be reference. That's going to be similar to Eric's shield from Dungeons and Dragons, if you remember the old cartoon. The Cavalier shield that could create the invisible force field.
Mm.
So it'll look like a shield, but it's going to create that photonic shield around it. And that's what gives it its power. So you can expand the shield. You can use it aggressively without having to throw it like the way Cap does.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's like in when Mark Waid was writing Captain America, and he came up with that. Yeah, he could alter its shape. He can make weapons out of the energy. He can make like a full-on force field. And yeah, instead of throwing it, you shoot it off like a laser, and then you just like reform to another one.
Yeah, and I think it's going to have that shield shape.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to have the look of a Captain America shield, but it's also going to have that photonic power around it.
Yeah.
And then he's going to give him some kind of juice, and it's going to be John Walker, and then you're going to have a different Hawkeye. Maybe we're going to get. You know what? Oh man, mark my words. The next Avengers series is going to be Dark Avengers.
Ooh.
So when you get the start of Infinity War, it's going to be Thanos coming, and you're going to see all of the Dark Avengers. You're going to see John, but they're not going to be like the Dark Avengers. They're not going to be like actual villains. Maybe one or two. We got to find the villains we found so far that we could use in this. But you're going to see. Oh, you might see Mr. Hyde. He's a known superhuman. But you're going to see Tony Stark. He's going to have John Walker, and he's going to have Hawkeye's brother, who grew up in the circus with him, is just as good, but maybe is a little less concerned. You're going to have, and of course, you're going to have Spider-Man in his group, and that, of course, is going to be that big conflict. Is Spider-Man like Stark? I don't think these guys are superheroes. You could just see Tom Holland looking at Adam saying, like, Mr. Stark, I'm not sure these guys are heroes. I'm not sure we're on the right side here, And, you're going to have the super soldier serum breaking down in John Walker. They might actually really go out on a limb and make it William Burnside. And what'll be fun is if they get Chris Evans to play William Burnside. That'll be fun. Maybe even adding in a Bucky for him, Oh, they could go with Battlestar there, and say, Battlestar and John Walker. I'd love to see Battlestar in the Marvel universe.
I was going to say, what if they had Moonstone? But what if they put Captain Marvel there? Like, what if some of it, like at least one or two of these people become like, because they said that stuff's going to change after Infinity War and whatever that second part is. So, like, what if they have Captain Marvel on that Tony Stark team, but then afterwards she moves on to like the real Avengers? Maybe Tom Holland's Spider-Man moves on to the new Avengers.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm certain Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Like I said, right now I'm thinking Tom Holland's Spider-Man is going to be the conscience of the Marvel Universe going forward.
Well, I think they said I think that I heard somewhere they said they're going to build a lot around him come Phase 4.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, because he's the youngest guy, and I can see, and what it'll be. Here's my prediction. So you have Captain Marvel, who is a military person. You have John Walker, who's a military person. You have Rhodey, who's still on the team, and you're going to have them building out these military people to be their superhuman Captains America. Stark is going to be using every bit of tech he can get his hands on because he knows something's coming. Because for what it's worth, Thor left, and he told him he had to leave because he said, Infinity Stones have been showing up on Earth. I got to find out why. And that's the last words Thor gave to Tony. Tony isn't going to sit there and ignore it.
No.
Tony's going to say, oh, yeah, Infinity Stones. Okay, right. Okay. Thor's off. Let me replace everybody. Because in the next moment, it's like, now Cap is causing me trouble because he's got some kid he's got to fight for. Dude, we're defending the world. So Tony is going to stand up and say, okay, I need a new Cap. I have a vision. Thank goodness I have a vision. I got Spider-Man, but
I got a super connection tied all together. Remember we were talking about 90s nostalgia, especially in comics.
Mm-hmm.
The new team, John Walker, 80s 90s creation. Got Jim Rhodes, either as War Machine or Iron Patriot. I said Red Norvell with that power belt, but what if we get Thunderstrike?
Well,
Masterson.
Two Thors, yeah, recreating a Thor. Oh, I'll give you one better. Ragnarok the Thor clone.
There you go.
Tony built him. Tony says, I need a Thor.
And
I can even...
He doesn't have... Oh, no, I was going to say, what if Tony Stark doesn't have, as well, except for that belt, I don't think he has access to Asgardian weaponry or anything. What if Tony tries to create like a version of the hammer, but it's not mystical, it's like a machine.
Well, let me give you one bit. Who says he doesn't have access to Asgardian technology? Let's not forget.
Yeah, but
if we are going to say
thanks to Thor Ragnarok, is Asgard even still there? Or maybe the stuff gets scattered. Ooh.
Well, things have been scattered for millennia, as we know from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., where we see the Berserker staffs hidden in trees all around the world. And I think this might be this more deeper point, is that, and, oh man, you think about it. You think about what we saw in Homecoming, which is that you have the Vulture picking off all the things Damage Control couldn't grab, right? But Damage Control grabs most of it. So every bit of tech that falls to Earth, Damage Control is pulling it together in one location. And we know that Damage Control is associated with Stark International. So there's nothing that's coming across Damage Control's desk that isn't also going to Stark. So you have this idea that Stark is totally deconstructing all this tech. Hydra was getting it too, but Tony's not above taking Hydra tech and repurposing it for his own use. And so right now I am thinking these Dark Avengers are what you're looking at. Yeah, it might be Red Norvell, it might be Thunderstrike, it might be anybody. It might be Ragnarok, the Thor clone.
I just had another thought. You were saying, Tom Holland's Spider-Man might be on this new Avengers team. What if he's not? Because he turned Tony Stark down, and if we go all 90s nostalgia, I mean, if you're going to create a Thor clone, what if he clones Peter Parker, without his consent? Yes, because I saw an article today. They said, I don't know if this was confirmed or not, but I saw it was saying that homemade Spider-Man suit that he wears in the movies before Tony gives him the high-tech suit. Originally, they were toying with the idea of making it look like that original Scarlet Spider suit. But they didn't. So what if they were saving Scarlet Spider for something else?
That's an interesting theory. If he's going to clone Thor, he might clone Spider-Man. He might.
If you can clone an Asgardian, you can clone a human with superhuman powers. Come on.
Oh man, what if he clones Cap? What if that's who William Burnside is? Or what, I mean, there are so many ways. I mean,
or what's his face? Protocide.
Oh, Protocide. I love Protocide. I'd love to see Protocide in there somewhere. I don't think Protocide's making it to the movie. I think we might see Protocide in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. at some point.
Maybe. But I mean, you could call the clone that. But and you made the point several times about James Rhodes. Remember when he got a new clone body? You could have a whole clone Avengers.
Yeah, well, that's what I think, I mean, Tony's a little mechanical. I think cloning, I think if you do all clones, it's a little weird. But once Tony cracks cloning, he's not going to stop. So
yeah, I mean, cloning might be easier because you don't have to create all these power sets. I mean, if you get some Steve Rogers DNA, there's some super soldier serum in there. If you get some Thor DNA, there's your Asgardian DNA. I'm sure he's got access, if not access to Peter Parker's DNA, enough readouts from that suit.
Well, yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, they said that Kate was recording everything the whole time.
Yep.
And not for nothing, Peter is a teenage boy. So there's probably DNA everywhere.
You always got to go into the gutter with that, Charlie Esser.
I had too much apple juice tonight.
Even with that high-tech suit, I mean, Tony could be recording his brainwave patterns. I mean, you could have...
Oh, yeah. No, honestly, yeah. Honestly, right now, Tony has enough to build his own Spider-Man. Honestly, And
I mean, the rest of the Avengers have been in that tower. I'm sure there's, hair follicles or something he can use the clones.
Here, I'm going to give you something fun for Spider-Man.
Uh-oh.
Okay. Remember when you had the Scarlet Spiders in Avengers Academy, and they had the 3 MVP Michael Van Patrick clones, who were the naturally occurring super soldiers, and they all wore the Scarlet Spider, but they were the high-tech suit that Tony Stark had created for Spider-Man when Spider-Man unveiled himself.
Mm-hmm.
And we see a high-tech suit in Tony's Avengers compound that he was going to give to Spider-Man. What if he creates an AI based on Tom Holland? So all of a sudden the Spider-Man's there, but then all of a sudden Tony says, release, activate the Scarlet Spider Legion. And you see all those Spider-Man costumes, essentially much as we've seen before, but they're all powered by these Tom Holland AIs, basically empty suits of armor, but that are going to attack for Tony. I mean, there's so many ways that Tony...
What if you get one AI Spider-Man who maybe there's a problem with the programming, starts going dark, and it's just like, don't call me Spider-Man, call me Kane.
I don't know. Oh, AI goes evil again because we already did that story.
That's what I'm saying. They got to go cloning.
Cloning is a way to go with this. I mean, I think one of the things, it's amazing where we got from just the idea that Tony's working on another Captain America to this entire other conversation. But that's the fun of super connections. That's the fun of Superconnectivity, is that we can go, where's the next stage? We create this, then what's the next thing? Then what's the next thing? Then what's the next connection? And when we look at what Tony can do, and like I said, I do feel that the heroism of Black Panther is going to be mitigated by his duty to Wakanda. I think we're going to find this place going into Avengers Infinity War where you have Black Panther kind of in a dark place, Tony in a dark place.
I think the Black Panther movie is probably the best place for this. You get a couple end credit scenes, maybe one end credit scene. You see Steve Rogers and his group like making it to Wakanda or something. Maybe you see that, Black Panther's helping them out, at least giving them shelter or whatever, maybe supplying them with stuff, Hawkeye's arrows, whatever, some trick arrows. But then the second scene, you get Tony Stark having a big press conference. And this time there is a big announcement. It's his Avengers.
Yes. Let me give you, let me put this point. At the end of Cap's in a dark place. At the end of Homecoming, Tony's in a dark place. At the end of Black Panther's going to be in a dark place. I think what we're going to be seeing going forward is these three pillars of the Marvel Universe that we're creating here are going to be all in that dark place. And barring a bit from some what ifs, it's going to be Tom Holland's Spider-Man, who reminds everyone who they have to be. And that's where we get our Uncle Ben. That's where we get our great power comes great responsibility. Because maybe Thanos gets the Infinity Gauntlet. Maybe he does wipe out half the universe, just like in the stories. And maybe it is up to Tom Holland to bring it back, and understand, and being the only person who is at this point mature enough to be the hero to say, I can put it back just as it was. I'm not going to make it better just for me, because I know that's going to be wrong. I know when something is wrong. I don't need to make things better. I just need to make things what they once were. And I think that's a great way to end that fourth Avengers film. And when we get at the end of the fourth Avengers film with a bunch of tired old heroes and Tom Holland and maybe Captain Marvel and maybe James Roden Falcon, and of course Hawkeye's still there because the man needs work. And Scarlett Johansson if they can afford her. And they say, okay, let's see where we go next.
Did you say Black Panther? I think Black Panther should be in there.
I think here's the thing. I think that it's going to be hard to really put Black Panther on the Avengers, because Black Panther has a day job.
Well, I think he's going to be like the Batman. He's going to be like, yeah, I'm not one for teams, but when you need me, call me.
Well, yeah, exactly. Oh, speaking of Batman, did you hear they tossed out all of Ben Affleck's poor script?
Oh yeah, they're starting from scratch.
Yeah, because not for nothing, and it's not to be a drag on poor old Ben Affleck, but Ben Affleck wrote that script based on the Snyderverse. And we're in a Jenkinsverse now. Where basically they said, no, Jenkins won. It's sort of how we're really not in a Whedonverse anymore. We're kind of in a who did the Cap movies?
The Russo brothers?
We're in a Russoverse now. So Marvel's in a Russoverse, and DC's in a Jenkinsverse. There is, so anything that was written for Snyderverse isn't going to make it. Anything that was written for a Whedonverse isn't going to make it.
Well, I think the powers at DC there, or Warner's, I think they've learned their lesson. It's like, yeah, okay, Batman can be kind of dark, but we really don't need a dark Superman. I mean, Wonder Woman was, even set in World War I, was still lighter than anything that we put out before. And look at the numbers that's hitting.
Well, exactly.
And look at the numbers, all the Marvel stuff that comes out, even
yeah.
I'm sure they would love to have, even one of the lower performing Marvel, movies.
Well, of course. Not for nothing, we aren't Kang. Our lives are not so grand that we wish to be in darkness. Our lives are at a point where we would like to be in a place where where heroes, even when they are conflicted and dark, although for what it's worth, Marvel has been getting darker. I think that's the thing, is Marvel used its darkness as contrast to the light, whereas I think DC is using darkness as he went to medieval times, as I said. Did you eat a turkey leg?
No, I think it was chicken or turkey. They taste the same.
Okay. It was a thigh. Okay. It was enjoyable. It's probably a chicken thigh then. Medieval times, you ever go, they have the big turkey legs. That's the thing. Even though turkeys weren't in medieval Europe, because they're an American bird. Anyway. Where were we? Marvel uses its darkness as a contrast to its light. DC paints in dark colors and isn't painting the light as much as it should. And it's like darkness is a contrast. It's not meant to be the goal. But That's my take on it. We didn't even get to my Doc Brown theory, although I'm going to write up that blog post about how Doc Brown really has a level of genius that really surpasses anyone, and probably created the Mr. Fusion that we see at the end of Back to the Future, and actually probably made a lot of money off the deal. It's an interesting take.
Yeah, but do you think he created that from scratch, or did he travel to 2015 and kind of?
So here's what it is. Okay, so spoilers for my blog post. When Doc Brown says this sucker is nuclear, and he says we use plutonium, there's never any discussion of waste. And what he is doing is he's created a fusion reactor using plutonium to create a super heavy element. Because, okay, so to understand, okay, now you're going to get me talking science. To understand how an element is radioactive, essentially the element decays at a very fast rate. Faster than elements normally decay at, because they're too large and they can't hold their protons and neutrons together. So plutonium has that high radioactivity because it is constantly in this state of decay. However, if he finds a way to create a fusion reaction, so normally what we do is we exploit that rate of decay to create a fission reaction that creates a lot of energy, but most nuclear power plants are essentially just steam generators. But theoretically, if you create a fusion reactor, you can actually convert more matter to energy and then harness that energy. And this is actually the importance of the flux capacitor. The flux capacitor is a device that when you experience, because essentially when you travel through a wormhole, there is a theoretical creation called an electromagnetic flux that will disincorporate any matter or energy that goes through it, so that no data can go from the future to the past, or arguably from the past to the future. But if you had a device that could capacitate that flux and prevent that deconstruction of matter and energy, you could then travel through time. Likewise, you could use that flux capacitor to contain the energy of a fusion reaction of plutonium. Yes.
I need help getting to fruit snacks.
Okay, we'll get fruit snacks after the conversation. And you would use that energy harness to power the flux capacitor to create the wormhole to... Oh, and interestingly enough, using the plutonium is actually going to create a super heavy element, which may in fact power the wormhole that directs the car. Okay. I'm going to get into more detail with this. I'm actually going to do the math on it and figure out exactly what a super heavy double plutonium would look like to see if it would actually meet the science that I'm trying to create here. But I like the idea, and we'll see where it goes. But that is the Easter egg I recently pulled out, that the Mr. Fusion reactor that is using non-traditionally fissile materials to create that fusion must have been created by someone who had created a fusion reaction earlier, and it is how he has created this device that allows his car to work. And that, as Mr. Fusion says, that he then gave his science to the world to say, here's a way that you can have really cheap free energy going forward. And so Doc Brown, I think, actually creates that utopia you see in 2015 of the clean, special world, because he had already created that technology and just needs to go back into the past to establish everything. And since he has a time machine, it's relatively easy. Okay. Oh, I think those are enough super connections for 1 week, Phil, unless you have anything else to add.
No, I'm good.
Okay. This has gone on way too long, well over an hour. Even though it was a yell at the wait what guys for going on too long. But hey, we're going to go on a while tomorrow.
If you want, invite them on. Hash it out with them 1 week.
You know what? I'm going to have to try that.
Oh.
Oh, goodness. Those guys are like famous. I don't know if I could. I don't know. They have a podcast, Phil, that I listen to. You know, clearly they're way more successful than I am. It's okay. You know what? I just may reach out to them. I have to get my computer working. I don't do the computers as well as I used to as a kid. Anyway, Phil, if people would like to write to you about all the things that go on in the universe, where can they find you?
If I would like to write to me, I will write to me at nightwingpdp@gmail.com. On Twitter, I am at nightwingpdp. If you are the Wait What guys or anybody else who would like to be interviewed on Capes and Lunatics, contact me any of those ways.
Okay. And of course, you can always write to me in that old-fashioned email way the way our moms and pas once did at superconnectivityblog@gmail.com. That's superconnectivityblog, all one word, @gmail.com. And of course, follow me on the Twitters at Charlie Esser. That's CharlieEesser. Look for the 2 E's in the middle for quality. And of course, always, Phil, what's our phone number on Capes and Lunatics?
Our voicemail, if you would like to... This goes for all the shows on Capes and Lunatics. If you would like to send us your thoughts on anything, 614-382-2737. That's 614-38-CAPES.
Yes. So if you would like to communicate with us as the way our grandpas and grandmas once did, you can call us on the telephone. And we would love if you did. Okay, kids. Thank you for connecting with us. Remember, it's not just connections. It's super connections. Please connect with us again.